A woman protects her husband and child from the new nanny after the mysterious deaths of the people around them. However, as more information comes to light, things aren't quite as they seem. In the kitchen, Becky prepares a cup of coffee while taking a call from her friend Emily. While placing a spoonful of sugar into the hot beverage, she mentions how she isn't worried about a particular woman stopping her from seeing the most well-adjusted man she's ever dated. Suddenly, she feels dizzy and drops the mug on the floor. Then, she dazedly stumbles a few feet before falling to the floor. Becky realizes someone must have laced her sugar, so she crawls to safety. However, a stranger appears from behind and holds a gloved hand over the woman's nose and mouth, smothering her until she perishes. Then, the person places an open medicine canister on the counter to make it appear as though Becky took her own life. Days later, Amber Deschanel arrives at the Simon residence for the au pair interview. When Brian Simon answers the door, the woman apologizes for her lateness due to getting stuck in traffic. She says she doesn't expect them to consider her for the position after the horrible first impression, but thought it best if she gave them an explanation. To her surprise, the sympathetic man invites her inside and says they can squeeze her in between the other candidates. In the kitchen, Amber meets Brian's wife Elise and they immediately conduct the interview. The woman says she took up nursing in college, but because of all her student debts, she decided to work as an au pair or nanny to make money. Then she hands the couple a piece of paper with her previous employers' names and phone numbers as her reference and mentions that her last clients were the Falcones who live at Colson Lake. When they hear their son crying, Elise heads to the bedroom to check on the child. Brian asks Amber where she's from, and the woman says she was born in Canada, but now that she lives in the US, she can't see herself ever leaving the country. The man teases that she can never be president, which she agrees to, and the pair share a flirtatious look. Seconds later, Elise returns with Cody, and the mother introduces her son to Amber. After concluding the interview, the mother tells the woman that she'll call her regarding any updates. In bed, Elise admits she liked Amber out of all the candidates, but Brian says she doesn't have to make her mind up immediately and call the references first. The wife remarks on the woman's beauty, and the husband says she's a bit plain looking but adds that he's fine with the decision if Elise doesn't feel comfortable about hiring a nanny. So the woman says she'll call the references in the morning, then turns to her side to go to sleep. Brian tries to initiate lovemaking, but Elise doesn't reciprocate, and he assumes she still hasn't forgiven him for a past betrayal. The next day, Brian's co-worker Vance happily informs him that they got the virtue at account, and the men joyfully jump around the break room. Vance thinks they should celebrate tonight, but to his disappointment, Brian calls his wife to tell her the good news. Elise informs her husband that she called Amber's references, and they all gave glowing reviews about the nanny. The next day, the newly hired au pair arrives early and catches Brian in the middle of his workout in the garage. The man says Elise and Cody are at their mommy and me self-defense group, and then he helps carry her luggage into her room. When she sees the room, the nanny says it's bigger than her last apartment in New York. Confused, Brian says he thought she last lived in Colson, so she quickly adds that she lived in New York before then. Seconds later, Elise arrives and says she needs to show her husband something in the living room. There, she shows the man a hidden nanny cam in a picture frame. That night, the couple makes love, but to Elise's horror, she sees Amber standing by the bed watching them. Eventually, she wakes up and realizes it was just a nightmare. The next day, in the art gallery she owns, Elise tells her business partner Lori that they finally decided to hire a nanny. The friend says she's glad the woman's finally moving on from Brian's infidelity, and adds that even if the husband cheated, he's still better than most men. Suddenly, Mr. Dutros arrives to remind the women about his offer to buy the building they're leasing, hoping to turn it into a condominium. Elise says the answer is still no, so before he departs, the man leaves them with a threatening message about incurring his anger. Later at the playground, Elise suggests postponing the party at their house until the au pair becomes acclimated. Still, Brian says it'll be fun having someone else watching Cody while they enjoy themselves. During the party, the mother grabs drinks from the fridge, but when she looks out the window, she sees Amber looking back, startling her. Moments later, she rejoins the table where Vance and Brian talk about their boss, Catherine Parsons, whom they call Ice Queen. Vance excuses himself to the bathroom and then runs into Amber, with whom he drunkenly flirts. However, the au pair doesn't fall for his charms and walks away. Outside, Vance tells the group that he met the new nanny, and when Lori tells him to stay away from Amber, he matter-of-factly says she isn't his type while giving Brian a knowing look. The next day, the au pair tells Elise that she put Cody to bed, so the mother thanks her for doing such a good job. Then, she asks the woman to lay out the child's clothes for tomorrow. After Amber leaves, leaves, the mother takes the SD card from the nanny cam and watches the day's footage in the bedroom. Later that night, the nanny watches a news report about Becky's case, which the authorities now consider a homicide. Suddenly, Brian arrives and asks the woman what she's watching. She says she was watching the news, which she admittedly finds scary because of all the awful things happening in the world lately. When the man says he's heading to bed, Amber offers to prepare him a drink and he accepts. Then, they continue the conversation on the couch, and the woman asks if he always works late. So Brian explains that he's had to, especially after landing the Virtue Ed account. She mentions meeting Vance during the party, prompting him to apologize for his co-worker's actions. He says Vance is the type of guy most women find interesting, but she corrects him and says he's the kind of guy most women find unappealing. Brian finds her take refreshing, and Amber says she isn't as innocent as she looks. Later, the husband enters the bedroom and quietly lays next to his wife, whom he doesn't know is still awake. Meanwhile, the au pair listens through the bedroom door to ensure the couple's asleep before heading to her room to call someone she needs to see immediately. The nanny goes to a diner to see her friend Jax, and she shares how she is having difficulty resisting her attraction to the child's father. The exasperated friend remarks that she can't keep doing the same thing, implying that Amber's always had an affinity for going after her married clients. Jax asks if she's still taking her medication, and the nanny affirms. Eventually, Amber apologizes for dumping her problems onto the woman and asks how she's doing. The friend says she's still house sitting for the same client and likes the gig because she usually has the house to herself. The next day, Catherine Parsons informs Brian that Virtue Ed insisted only one person lead their account, so she decided to hand the reins over to Vance. Furious, the man says he landed the account, which makes him first in line, but the woman argues his co-worker developed a good relationship with the client, which is why she chose him. Later, Elise says she's in disbelief at Brian's boss's decision. She asks if Vance is okay with it, and the husband remarks that his co-worker only looks out for himself. Then, the man calls Amber to take Cody to his room so the child doesn't hear the parents argue. Elise insists Brian march back to the office and confront his boss, but the annoyed husband grabs his car keys and says he's going out for a drive to clear his mind. After several hours at a bar, the intoxicated man stumbles home and sees that the nanny is still awake. In his drunken state, Brian kisses the au pair, who reciprocates his actions. However, she stops him and expresses her concern about the job if Elise finds out, but the man assures her she won't lose it. So the pair enter her bedroom, and when Amber removes her top, her charm bracelet falls to the floor. Then they move to the bed where they make love. The next day, the nanny kisses Brian in the kitchen and assures him that Elise and Cody have already left. The man pushes her away and says even though he enjoyed last night, it can never happen again. He says he was vulnerable with the lost account and the argument with his wife, and Amber just happened to be there. After the rejection, the devastated woman locks herself in her bedroom. Then, she grabs her secret phone from the dresser to call Jax, desperately needing someone to talk to. Later, Vance enters Brian's office and says leading the Virtue Ed account wasn't his call, but the betrayed coworker says he'd have never done the same thing to him if the roles were reversed. Before he leaves, Vance says Brian's aversion to ruthlessness was why he didn't get the position. Then, the man watches the arrogant coworker subtly flirting with Catherine outside his office and assumes he got the account by buttering up their boss. That night, Vance waits inside a motel room for the courtesan he hired. Soon, he hears a knock on the door, and when he opens it, he asks the person wearing a pink wig what they're doing there, implying he knows who it is. Suddenly, the person stabs Vance in the stomach, and he stumbles back into the room. He tries to close the door, but the attacker enters. The next day, Detective Bennett and Detective Scalise arrive at the Simon residence, requesting the couple to head to the station to answer a few questions. At the station, the cops show the husband a security camera image of a woman wearing a wig, and he sees the bracelet on the person's wrist, which looks just like Amber's. However, the man chooses to withhold this detail from the detectives. Then, the cops mention speaking to Catherine, who told them about his dispute with the victim. Brian admits he's still angry about losing the account, but he'd never resort to murder. That night, while the man watches TV, Amber surprises him by sitting on his lap and kissing him. He pushes her away and says she needs to stop, so the au pair threatens to tell Elise. She says she knows the wife won't believe him, given his history of cheating. So the exasperated man heads back to bed. In the gallery, Elise and Lori meet with their lawyer, Chalfie, Cody, who warns them to tread carefully when dealing with a powerful enemy like Mr. Dutros. Minutes later, Amber and Cody arrive, so Elise leaves the meeting early to spend time with her son. After they depart, Chalfie tells Lori he's surprised the woman hired an attractive nanny despite her husband's proclivities. The following day, Elise receives a call from her business partner about vandalism at the gallery. Seeing all the ruined artwork, the friends insist it was Mr. Dutros' doing, but the cop points out that the crude word painted across one of the pieces is singular, which he finds baffling since there are two of them. When Elise asks what they're supposed to do now, the officer promises to treat their case with urgency. Later, Mr. Dutros visits a junkyard as a potential site for his rental properties. He senses someone following him, but when he calls out, no one answers. However, when he's about to get in his car, he turns around for a second, and someone slashes his throat with a knife. At the police station, Detective Bennett calls Brian back in because of the coincidence that the two people giving him and his wife problems turned up dead. However, he's free to go because they've got no evidence to justify detaining him. At the playground, Brian's about to come clean to Elise about what happened between him and the nanny, but the wife interrupts him and mentions how Amber seemingly doesn't sleep. She says that she wakes up in the middle of the night and can hear the au pair in her room. Other times, she checks Amber's room and she isn't there. The man says their nanny isn't a child and she can do whatever she wants when she isn't on the clock. When Elise mentions what Brian wanted to tell her earlier, he says they can talk about it another time. That night, the couple watches the nanny cam feed and waits for Amber to leave. Elise follows the nanny to a house, where she sees her frantically knocking on the door until a woman lets her in. Then, she eavesdrops on Jax and Amber's conversation, where the au pair rants about why she keeps falling for her married clients when all she's ever wanted is a normal life. So Elise returns home, removes her necklace, and places it in her jewelry box. Then, she tells Brian that the au pair was just visiting a friend. The next day, the woman returns to the house and meets Jax. She asks to speak to her about Amber, reasoning that she only needs information for her family's safety. Inside, Jax says they grew up in the same orphanage because Amber lost her family in a car accident. When Elise gives her a confused look, the woman says she thought her friend told the employer this information before she was hired. Jax adds that Amber had an inappropriate relationship with her foster father. Eventually, Elise thanks the woman and promises not to tell the nanny about their conversation. After the guest leaves, someone knocks on Jax's door, but when she goes to check, there's nobody there. However, when she turns around, she sees the patio doors open, and suddenly, someone from behind incapacitates her with a taser. In the house, Elise calls the nanny's reference again, but she hears a phone ring from another room. She follows the sound to the au pair's room and finds the secret phone in the dresser. So she calls Brian and tells him that Amber faked her references. She thinks the nanny asked her friends to pretend to be former clients and give glowing reviews. Elise tells her husband to come home to confront the au pair together. Later, Amber and Cody arrive, so the mother takes the child to his room. In the kitchen, the nanny sees her phone on the counter and realizes the woman knows she lied on her resume. When Elise returns, Amber tries to explain, but the mother doesn't want to hear her excuses. The employer accuses her of killing Vance and Mr. Dutros and says she's going to jail. When the nanny tries to leave, Elise uses her self-defense training to knock her out. Then she strangles the au pair, but Brian arrives and stops his wife from ending the woman's life. While the couple's distracted, Amber scrambles to her feet and escapes. At the station, the cops inform the couple that everything the nanny told them about her background was a lie. With all the circumstantial evidence, they say they have no reason to believe that Amber didn't commit the murders. 6 months later, Brian digs a hole in the backyard for new plants. While shoveling, he finds his wife's jewelry box buried in the dirt, and when he opens it, he sees Amber's charm bracelet inside. Suddenly, Elise acknowledges that he now knows she was behind everything. She picks up the bracelet and says adding it to her disguise was a nice touch since it incriminated the nanny. The wife admits she killed Vance because he stole the husband's account, and Mr. Dutros deserved what was coming for him. Then, Elise reveals she also murdered Becky, the woman Brian had an affair with. The deranged woman admits the only person she felt terrible for killing was Jax, but she couldn't risk leaving any loose ends. Brian says Elise ruined Amber's life by making her take the fall for the crimes, and the wife says she knew the nanny was the perfect patsy from the first time she met her. When the man asks what he's supposed to do next, the woman says he can either tell the police the truth and ruin their family or play along with her plan and have the perfect life. Later, Brian hands the bracelet over to Detective Bennett and says he found it while they cleaned out the nanny's room. After the man leaves, Detective Scalise informs his partner that the judge signed the arrest warrant for the Simons. When Brian returns home, he finds an envelope addressed to him and his wife at the front door. Inside, they find a USB flash drive, so Elise plugs it into her laptop. To their surprise, it contains a video from Amber, who tells them she knew about the nanny cam from the beginning. The au pair says that just as Elise had suspicions about her, she also had suspicions about the mother. When Vance and Mr. Dutros perished, she figured out the woman's plan to place the blame on her, so she changed the thumb drive on the nanny cam with her own. Amber says she didn't hear about Jax's murder until weeks later, and 2 witnesses claimed seeing a woman wearing a black hoodie leaving the house. So after checking the nanny cam footage, she saw Elise returning to the house wearing a black hoodie within an hour of the pathologist's estimated time of death for her friend. Then, she reveals that she sent Elise's hair and the video to the police, and she's confident it'll match the DNA at the crime scene. The defeated woman sobs as she hears the police sirens nearing the house, stunned by the crushing realization that the nanny outsmarted her.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.